Welcome, you hardy bunch who were here for Traviata and are now here for Magic Flute. I want to welcome our panel. We will start with my right, Graham Jenkins, our music director, who is conducting this production of Magic Flute. Patrick Carfizzi, who is returning to sing the role of Papageno. Raymond Aceto, who is singing Sarastro. Matthew Lata, who is staging this production of Magic Flute, on my right, left, whatever hand that is. Ava Pine, who's singing Pamina. And the only one who's actually making their Dallas Opera debut, Shawn Mathey, our Tamino. Well, I should clarify, because this is Matthew's debut as a stage director, but he actually had a job early in his career here as an assistant, so we're glad to have you back. Magic Flute, what can one say about Magic Flute? We've all seen a production of it, I'm sure. Is there anyone here who has never seen a production of Magic Flute? Good to know. There's someone here who is actually going to be seeing their first Magic Flute. You're in for a treat. It's a beautiful production. Matthew's been involved with this production from its beginning. It was created for Lyric Opera of Chicago by a German director named August Everdink. Matthew has revived it. This is the fifth time?
Here will be number 6.
Here will be number 6. They just did it in Chicago earlier this season. There's a reason why they keep bringing it back. Of all the productions of Magic Flute I've ever seen, it's the most magical and enchanting, and it wasn't until we could have a set that would, a theater that could accommodate a set like this, we had to wait till the Windspear. It is really wonderful, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Graham has a strong affinity for this piece and is, a great affinity for Mozart in general. But what is it about Magic Flute in particular? Obviously, it's Mozart's last opera. It was written a few months before he was born. It's in a style, though, that's before he was born. A few months before he died, sorry. It's been a long day, give me a break. But it's in a style that's unlike his opera seria or any of his Italian operas. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the tradition of the Singspiel and what he was attempting to achieve in this piece.
How old was he when he died? 36, I think, and he wrote 26 operas. But if you go back and you look at what he did in the opera seria tradition, particularly Zaida and then the abduction from Seraglio, there's an awful lot of that in Magic Flute. And then the tradition in Germany, an awful lot of Rocco, the man who is the jailer in Fidelio. A lot of his lines are very, very similar to what Sarastro sings, particularly in the Act 2 trio. 1791, Mozart was an extremely famous composer, but he was not respected in Vienna. He wouldn't doff the cap, and he'd sort of blown it with the Viennese aristocracy. Remember that Don Giovanni had its premiere not in Vienna, but in Prague. And also in the year 1791, back in Prague, he'd premiered his penultimate opera, the Clemenza di Tito, with great success. He was really adored in that northern city. But the Viennese had sort of had enough. Too many notes, my dear Mozart, was the thing that they'd said after Abduction. And maybe his music was too modern. And then came the commission to write, not for the court theatre, but for almost a cabaret theatre, a suburban theatre outside the city walls by this man Schikaneder, who said, come and write this piece with me. And we all know the story that his wife Constanza thought this was very demeaning for her great composer husband to be writing, as it were, for the lower classes. But Mozart adored doing it. And you know, however melancholic you get, the joy in this music is just extraordinary, and it works on every level. It's a child's opera, it's a piece of fantasy, but it's also a very serious piece. And the tribulations we go through in life, the water and fire that we go through, it's all there in this story. You have to, when you choose finally your partner for life, do you really know them? You look across the room and say, yes, that's the person I'd like to be married to for my life. But you need to be tested, and that's what this piece does. And as you return to it, the joys that are within the piece are fantastic. Yes, there are Masonic secrets, that first knock of the overture, the Masonic instruments he uses, the strange clarinet, these basset horns he uses, the strange sound of the trombones which pre-echo the Requiem, which was also just around the corner. There are some very dark sides to the piece, and yet there is the joy and the fun and the games, and as you go on through Act 2, so the games become more and more outrageous until Papageno finally arrives and everybody erupts with laughter. What would he have written had he survived? It is extraordinary to think that in 1791, there he was, almost penniless, perhaps from gambling debts. His wife wasn't very well and she was away in the spa, costing him a great deal of money, and he couldn't get a job in Vienna. And this was sort of the last gasp. I suspect that had he lived, he might have relocated and gone to live in Prague. Even in the time he arrived in Vienna in, 1786, he moved apartment once or twice a season. If you go now to the Figaro house, which is in the shadow of the St. Stephen's Cathedral just east of the cathedral in Vienna, and you see that magnificent room that he lived in at the height of his financial success, writing Figaro, happy with the world, happy with the Viennese aristocracy, and how quickly within 6 years it all went wrong. No longer did as it were, the Empress want him to sit on her lap and for him to play ditties. That world that is seen in the play Amadeus and in the movie, it didn't exist anymore. Life was tough, and he'd end up writing strange pieces for double bass and glass harmonica just to make ends meet. It was not easy that last year. And I commend to you a wonderful book by Robbins Landon, 1791, in the last year in Mozart's life, so you can just get a feel where he himself, I think, must have been in pretty bad way mentally, and yet from his quill pen, without a scratch in the manuscript, without a crossing out, just a couple of sketches where he was trying to sort out the fugal entries for the priests, but essentially it's straight, as it were, from God to the page to us. It's amazing. And even the history of the manuscript is quite interesting, because it ended up in one of the big Berlin museums, and when the bombing in Berlin became so intense, all those treasures in that museum were moved east into an area of Czechoslovakia. And after the war, the Czechs didn't want to give it back. And only in the last 10 years, finally, has the manuscript, which is in one volume, rare for Mozart's last 6 operas, has it come back, and it's now in the Stadtbibliothek in Berlin. And finally, we now all use this edition that everybody's so aware of. A work of genius. A work of genius, and in this production with Everding and with Matthew's help, we hope to bring it to life. And for those seeing it for the first time, I'm so pleased there is, because in Germany the tradition is, once your child is old enough, age 4, you go and you see it, and it's a part of life. In some theatres in Germany do a special pared down children's version just lasting 2 hours. However, we're Texans, and what do? We're going to telecast it into Cowboy Stadium. And I hear 25,000 people. And what will be fantastic for those 25,000 people who may have never, ever been to an opera?
Most of them probably have not, because we already have statistics that of the 7,000 people who have reserved seats, 93% of them have no history with the Dallas Opera.
Wouldn't it be fantastic if even half of that audience came next season to something?
I'd settle for 1%. Matthew, Graham touched on the way the piece developed. Obviously, Emanuel Schekenater was the original theater impresario who commissioned the piece, but he was also a singer and an actor, and he was the first Papageno. So he had a very clear idea, and he was also, of course, one of Mozart's Masonic brothers. So it was one of the reasons I think he commissioned the piece, was probably to help out a friend. But it's the juxtaposition of the serious and the comic that makes this piece unique. So why don't you talk a little bit about this and the approach and how you find the balance so that it doesn't veer too far one way or the other?
Well, Mozart knew the audience he was writing for, and he knew that, perhaps like our audience at Cowboy Stadium, quite a few of the people who were going to come to see this in Emanuel Schekenater's theater probably had not seen a Mozart opera. Everybody knew some of the tunes, of course, because the organ grinders were playing them all over Vienna, but they probably hadn't seen it. And he wanted the piece to have a certain resonance with the audience and a certain familiarity with, to the audience. He created this unique character of Papageno, which was played by Emanuel Schikaneder himself, who is the go-between between the audience and the stage. Now, Mr. Schikaneder probably included a lot of bits and shtick because he was a well-known comedian that people expected him to do. Say, like the old I Love Lucy show. Yes, she plays Lucy, but it's always Lucille Ball. So you're sort of appreciating that what she is doing. Because of the Masonic connection, the original dialogue, by the way, is much, much longer than the dialogue that is ever performed in the theater. And a lot of it is a bit arcane if you don't understand Masonry, and quite properly, modern productions take a lot of that away. They simply allude to a kind of a structure of a society that is the backdrop to both the comedy and the darkness in the piece. And a society that presumably our two protagonists are striving towards. In balancing the comic and the serious elements here, well, the serious elements kind of take care of themselves. Arias like Archifuls, like Die Bildnis, the self-realization arias of our principles. The Sarastro arias, which are a little bit about strength and philosophy. Some of the choruses, the big D major chorus of Act 2, which is one of my personal favorite pages in the score. All of those they have energy, but they are quite serious, although they are sung by characters who sometimes have a comic edge to them. So that kind of takes care of itself as long as you don't let it inform the piece completely. Everding's, one of the statements he made originally was, this was in a beer hall, and we must remember that. That's what he said. So he is, in this production, Mr. Everding, and the way it's developed over the years, because we've done it differently every time that we've done it, is not below the kind of fairly lowbrow humor that probably would have appeared on stage in Vienna in the period. So, for example, there's nothing wrong with being topical if you're playing in Dallas Cowboys Stadium. There's nothing wrong with Papageno speaking directly to the audience in whatever language they can best understand. So it's our job, again, to find that line, not go too far. And as Graham was saying, Act 2 starts to get a little bit wackier and wackier and wackier as we go through. One of the great challenges always when you're doing what is fundamentally a comedy, this piece, because it has that kind of a happy ending, is to establish a set of rules, very firm rules, obsessive rules that you follow, even to the point of ridiculousness. And then when you break them, I'll refer to the Lucy show again. You've seen the episode where she's trying to stuff candy in a box and the belt goes faster and faster. Well, that's the rule. She has to put the candy in a box. Absolutely, that rule cannot be broken. And then you push it, and you make that happen. And our rules for Papageno get broken all the time because he's always pushing the envelope. So that's a few of the things we do, and it's a lot of fun to adjust things. For example, we have dancing animals in the piece. Do they dance in Texas the same way they do in Chicago? I don't think so.
We're just going to tempt you. We're not going to give too much away, okay? But there is a moment, I have to say, that I'm not going to ruin it for you, but when I saw this in Chicago, it's during the Papageno duet, and the children that they imagine that they're going to have appear. It was the most heartwarming thing I'd ever seen. It makes you smile from ear to ear. Shawn, who is making his Dallas Opera debut, is a renowned Mozartian. It's sort of been a specialty. You've sung countless productions of Magic Flute, but you have sort of, maybe not happily, but been pigeonholed as a Mozart tenor. What is it about Tamino that you find challenging, and what do you find interesting? Or is there something about the character that you don't like?
Well, I think that having taken voice lessons from my late teen years, the tenor always encounters this beautiful aria, the picture aria, Die Bildnis. But when you finally get to put that into the context of the role and the production, then you realize why it is you've been introduced to this aria from the very beginning. What I love about the aria is that, and the character in general, is that there's such a wide spectrum of emotion that he gets to show, because there's a real innocence and naivete that he expresses. He believes in love, and whatever his notion of love is at that moment. But he's not stuck there. He's able to really dig in and explode, as it were, throughout the character, throughout the opera itself. So you really, vocally, emotionally, psychologically, you get to show so many different things. And I just, every time I get to do it, I feel so honored, because I think, my goodness, there was that day when I just thought this was an isolated song in a book. And it's such a part of such an enormous, wonderful, fantastic thing to be in this production.
Ava, this is the first time you're doing something for us that you have already done before somewhere else.
That's right.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Ava was our first resident young artist. We created the program for her, essentially. She was with us for 2 years, singing all of the small roles that we could possibly foist on her, covering some of the leading roles. But she graduated with honors. We gave her Adela and Fledermaus, which was her big league debut, and had a triumph and stole the show. What is it about Pamina? I feel that there's a connection here, and you've had the chance to do this role in several other places. So what is it that you bring to it that is special for you?
Well, this is my 4th time to sing Pamina, but my first time to sing the role in German. I sometimes jokingly refer to the opera as Pamina's no good, very bad, awful day. It just starts bad, it has some ups and it has some downs, but it ends happily, thankfully. For me, Pamina she is a teenager. When the person that she loves won't speak to her, she says, "I want to die." But she has so much heart, and she feels everything so truly and deeply and in a very real way that the teenage years kind of magnify, thinking back to that time. So everything that she feels and does has to be incredibly sincere. There's no artifice to her whatsoever. And I think that, to me, is what really, I appreciate that. There's no mask on this character. She's just absolutely 100% real. And it's my challenge to bring the audience along on that journey. While things are getting crazier on stage in Act 2, things are getting more and more intense for Pamina as a character. And so the comedy goes like this, and my drama goes like this. And it's the challenge is uniting the two and bringing you all along for both of those rides.
Ray, this is your 14th, 15th role. I mean, you've been you started out here when you were in your early 20s doing our school matinee performances and building up through some smaller but important roles like the Bonds and Butterfly, and moving on to Basilio and Barbara of Seville and Lucia, The Ring. You've been in, you've done pretty much a little bit of everything in French and German and Italian. This is the first time that you are doing Sarastro here. What is it? I mean, he doesn't have a lot to do. He has 2 big arias and some scenes, but he's a critical character. I mean, he's sort of at first painted as a villain, and everyone thinks that he's an evil sorcerer, and then suddenly he turns out to be the good guy. How do you find something, how do you communicate this?
The difficulty with this role is to not be what we call in the business the basso in toga, to not just be a statue dressed in a robe, pontificating these long, beautiful Mozartian lines. Because he really, truly is the humanity of the piece, I think, and the great heart of the piece. He certainly is the person who is overseeing whatever we want to call it, be Masonic or whatever the temple, guidelines are.
All this time I thought it was Scientology.
Scientology. No, I'm too tall to be Tom Cruise, but But what happens is that we see him at the end of Act 1 make his first appearance, basically kind of scolding Pamina a bit and making sure that Pamina and Tamino know that they can't speak to each other, they can't associate with each other, they have to first be purified. And we have no idea what that means. At the end of Act 1, you may leave Act 1 thinking that something terrible is going to happen. When we see him in Act 2, we see him begin the act with discussing with the other priests of the temple and basically taking up for Tamino and saying that this guy's really got something special. And he believes that the gods brought along Pamina to be special for Tamino. And it takes a bit of convincing. But it seems like they're finally going to say, okay, we will let these two, attempt the trials. I personally, I like that first scene of Act 2 because I really love the first aria that I sing, O Isis und Osiris, which is really indeed a prayer to the gods Isis and Osiris. But I like the second aria in Diesen Heiligen Hallen because, in my opinion, that becomes where we really truly see his humanity. It's generally done where it's just Sarastro and Pamina in the scene, and it's very fatherly. It's very fatherly, and I've been singing this role since 1990, before I had children, and it's amazing the difference in approach you do in a role like this when you do have children. And so you see the impulsiveness of the kids, Tamino and Pamina, and always having to be fatherly, and sometimes you have to hurt them for their own good.
Well, and there have been productions where it's been implied that Sarastro is actually Pamina's father.
Yeah. The only thing I don't like about the second aria, this in Diesen Heiligen Hallen, it comes right after the Queen of the Night sings her second aria. So generally, she has just torn the house down, and here I come to sing something long and slow, and
It's called musical contrast.
Oh, musical contrast. Yes, it's called musical contrast.
Patrick, you're the comic relief, essentially, in this piece. Tell us about your take on this particular character.
Well, I think it's good to start by saying that Papageno is the reason why I sing opera. In 1986, when I saw a production at the Metropolitan Opera, that was when I kind of turned to myself and said, I think this is what I want to do for a living. Crazy as that might have been. Pardon me, 1988, not 1986. I was 14. And so Papageno is so many things that we all can relate to in our daily lives, and in this piece, he grows and laughs and jokes and fears, and he is he's raw emotion. He's absolutely raw emotion from the beginning to the end, and reaction and action, but mostly reaction. He's in these multiple situations which are completely out of his comfort zone. He does not know exactly how to deal with Sarastro or the Queen. The Queen is fine as long as the Queen stays away, as long as she's not too close. And there's this thing called a prince. What's a prince? I've never heard of a prince. I work in the forest. I gather birds, and I eat, and I go to bed, and I get up in the next morning, and I do it again. And he is that simple. He is that simple, but that simplicity is his greatest gift, because he is very much like a child, not childish, but very much like a child in his innocence. And as he grows through the piece, that innocence is shaped, but never disappears.
What I find observing the rehearsals, the most challenging part of it for me, I would think, would be all of the German dialogue. And your way of delivering this is so spontaneous and fresh and charming. It's really amazing. But how do you, first of all, feel that you could, in a way, almost improvise in German Have you studied German? Do you speak German fluently? All of the questions that I'm sure will run through the audience's mind.
I've studied German. I always like to say I can get by in the streets of Berlin, or Köln, or any other city in Germany. I can get by just fine. I always hesitate to say the word fluent because I feel I have so much further to go with the language. But as far as improvising with the language, in my process of learning this role, when I first did it back in 2006 in that other city in Texas.
Is there another city in Texas?
There's no other city in Texas. No, there's no city that begins with an H. Oh, it must be Houston.
Yeah,
like they say in New York, it's Houston. 2008 or 2008. Forgive me. Thank you, Ray.
I was in it with him. That's hard.
Yeah.
I thought you were just a groupie and followed every one of his performances.
I follow Patrick.
God help you. But when I first went to learn this piece, I went ahead and I went ahead and learned every word in whatever score I happened to have. I happened to have 2 scores at that time, so I learned both versions. And that's been helpful. But more so, going to Germany, working in Germany was also incredibly helpful. Getting the language more into my body, I guess you could say, into my ears, into my head. So the freedom comes from practice. Some might say over-practice, but even more than that, it just comes from letting the language live when you're speaking it.
Ray, you have a lot of dialogue in this piece too. Do you as a singer find it difficult switching back and forth between speaking and singing?
No, not necessarily. The 2 problems, well, the one problem that when you've done a number of Magic Flute productions is 99% of the time the dialogue versions for each production are always different. So you remember certain lines a certain way, and then in the next production they do it, and it's almost the same line but not quite. So you're trying to remember to omit those other 2 words that aren't there or add the 2 words that are there. I think with anything, and it's probably, it would be a great question for maybe Broadway types who do a lot of dialogue. The spoken dialogue can be in such a different place vocally than you're singing. So you have to make sure that you protect yourself vocally when you're giving your spoken lines to not exhaust your voice vocally when it becomes time to sing. You almost have to say the spoken stuff in sort of almost a sung position in your throat, or because none of us speak. You've heard us all speaking now with the microphone, but when we go to sing, you'll hear a different sound. So you have to be careful to protect it.
In your case, actually, your speaking voice and your singing voice are placed pretty much in the same place. But Shawn, you have a bigger challenge because the tenor singing range is usually higher than the speaking voice, so that when tenors deliver dialogue, they always seem to be speaking in a much higher register. Do you have that problem making that adjustment?
I think it's probably sometimes the way tenor speak can make a lot of people laugh, including the tenor that's doing it, because sometimes, we're afraid of letting the voice drop and get too baritonal, whereas if I speak to you right now, my voice might be here. But I know if I have to sing an aria following a dialogue, I'm probably going to speak a little bit more up here, or it's going to be a little more placed, for lack of a better term. So I can almost hear myself talking as I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. I'm being real when I'm delivering the lines. I know what I'm saying. I'm in the moment. But I'm also being, like Ray said, self-protective, because you have to carry the vocal line through the evening. So there are some things you do differently in speaking dialogue.
Ava, do you have anything to add to that, since you're the only one who hasn't actually talked about dialogue?
Well, I will just say that when I was in college, I took a speech class for theater majors. I was lucky to sit in on it, and the professor kept encouraging these theater actors to use their breath, use their breath. What are you saving it for? She would say. And that's how we have to deliver our dialogue, just as we sing. We must use the breath. And I think many people talk without using their breath in a powerful, strong way. And so when we deliver dialogue with the breath, it stays in a healthy place.
Well, and also you need to project so it can be heard. And even though the dialogue is enhanced in most theaters, it still needs to be able to carry so people can understand, and it's not easy. But the transition of going back and forth is, do any of you have experience in musical theater?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think that would be helpful.
I mean, I grew up doing musical theater from a very, very young age. So yeah, experience with dialogue and going from song to dialogue was something that I just kind of did from 14 onward.
Okay, this is the perfect segue because I always have to ask people. Oh,
One of the most important things that I learned was when I was in college, the Shakespeare, or the theater department was producing Twelfth Night from Shakespeare, and they asked me to audition for the part of Count Orsino. It's a pretty big role. And so it was the first time I'd ever done anything that I couldn't fall back on my singing. Okay, so I couldn't use my singing, well, okay, maybe that dialogue didn't go so well, but hey, here's a song, and learned really to interpret what Shakespeare, because Shakespeare, it's not plain speak. It's interpretive, it's figurative, and that was a great lesson.
but isn't Orsino's first line, "If music be the food of love, play on"?
Play on.
Hey, you
The
could
access of it,
You
yes.
could have sung it. Who knew? But what Patrick was saying is a perfect lead-in to. You said you did a lot of musical theater growing up. How did you get started in the theater, and why did you? When did you first realize that you wanted to sing and that this was what was meant to be?
I started in the theater. The age-old story: someone got sick in the middle school play, and I happened to be the backup. And even though said young man was the son of the president of the Board of Education for the district, which got the teacher apparently in a whole heap of trouble, when he came back 2 weeks afterwards and wanted to do the show. And I said, no, I've done the 2 weeks of work. I want to do the show for the parents, please. Thank you. So that's how I started singing. And I was in chorus before that. Actually wanted to be a jazz musician prior to that. Was fascinated by improvisation, but didn't realize how much real practice you had to do before you could improvise. However, in terms of doing that for singing, that's one of the things that I love. I love that kind of play, improvisationally. And then I went to the Met with my first voice teacher and saw the Magic Flute, and then saw Trittico. And it was at the performance of the Magic Flute when I saw Håkan Håkagot sing Papageno that I said, this is what I want to do for a living. This is absolutely what I want to do. There's no doubt in my mind. And I'm a bizarre 14, 15-year-old who kind of thinks this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And what drew me so much to opera was the balance of all the forces that come together, dramatic and visual and musical, all of the art forms that come together to create opera, and that still draws me to it to this day.
Did you come from a musical family, or?
I came from a family that encouraged music, but mom and dad both had been discouraged from being musicians. Dad had a good voice, he was a good singer. We got him in costume at one point. That was fun. And mom was a violinist. And actually she still speaks fluent German, French, Italian, Spanish, and English. Oh, well, obviously English. But she wanted to be an interpreter and wasn't encouraged to do so. Nursing was the career. And she's since become a teacher, so it's great.
Ray, what is your entree into the world of opera?
A Rice Krispies commercial in about 1972.
I think you need to explain.
My mom has a cassette tape of me as a kid playing with the tape recorder, and basically there was a Rice Krispies commercials back then, and it was done in the style of Pagliacci, that this guy dressed in a clown suit came into the kitchen in the morning to get the Rice Krispies, and there weren't any Rice Krispies left, and he started singing, "No more Rice Krispies." Yeah, and it's gone down ever since. If you ask any of us, maybe Patrick's the awesome exception, but most of us in this business don't set out to necessarily be in this business. I sang in the choir and I played instruments in school. I played guitar. I had rock bands. I had all these things, and it was what to do when I went to college. And I said, well, I'll try to audition for voice, and just got in, and decided I would do music education and maybe be a music teacher. But I had a great voice teacher in my college, in my undergraduate, who found this raw material that I had that I didn't really know I had. And we started to work on it. And I started to listen to recordings and just fell in love. Actually, interesting, didn't even think about this. The first bass I ever heard on recording was Jerome Hines singing Magic Flute. So there you go. And was inspired. And, as you do, we do auditions, young artist programs, summer programs, regional opera houses, things like that. And maybe it snowballs, and and you're lucky enough to actually make a living from this. But now looking back on it, I can't think of anything I would have rather done or still rather do. So.
Oh, I love telling this story, but when I first heard Ray, he was 25, and he was in the Young Artist Program at the Met, and his agent at the time was sitting next to me at this audition, and I wrote on a note, I slid over, and I said, if this is what he sounds like at 25, what's he going to be like at 40? And Alec wrote, famous. Shawn, tell us about your background and how you got into music.
Well, I was very, very fortunate to grow up in a house where my father was a great choral conductor and a legitimately fantastic tenor. And when he would come home from work each night, he would not just say, hello, I'm home, how is everyone? But he would walk through the door and deliver a tenor cadenza of high C and all complete. And I was always fascinated by that sound. I was drawn to the resonance, the brilliance of it. And so from the age of 5 or 6, I just started trying to imitate him with vibrato and everything. I would shake my head up and down. And also I remember a summer vacation, a family vacation across the country, and he had just sung Tonio and The Daughter of the Regiment. And at least 2 times a day, I would ask him to sing the high C aria in the station wagon, with the other 3 children in the back seat, my mom, dad, and I in the front. And he would oblige me every time, and it was spot on, always. So imagine, I got to hear that, and I like to think that crept in osmotically, and at the age of 16, I just accidentally made a sound. And my dad said, yeah, that's it. That's it. So I can't begin to tell you how lucky I am to get to hear that. And I might add that he still sounds great, and we still sing together to this day.
Can I just add that Shawn's dad was my choir director in college. I went to where Shawn's dad taught, and Shawn's dad was a great influence in my musical life as well. So.
That's so cool. Thanks, Ray.
Ava?
Well, growing up, I was immersed in just about every musical style except opera. My dad is a very talented singer-songwriter, so I would sometimes guest with his country and western band, and I sang in choirs. I saw the musical Annie when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and just, I wanted to do that so badly. And so then I sang in the chorus of various musicals. My mother would drive me 45 minutes one way to go to rehearsal, and I just loved it. And I thought that when I went to school, I thought that I would eventually go to Broadway and do that whole thing, but A, I'm a horrible dancer, and B, they always wanted me to belt, and I did not like that. It made don't like that kind of singing, and so I actually just went and got a real job and lived as a civilian for a while. And it was in my late 20s that I decided I really wanted to try to pursue opera as a career. I had been singing in the area with various choirs and symphonies and that sort of thing, and I sang in a competition, and I remember Jonathan Pell saying to me, well, if you want to have a career in opera, you have a lot of catching up to do. And lo and behold, he helped me do that catching up. So,
And we're very proud of how it's all turned out. Graham, of course, has told his story many times. He was dragged off by a school teacher.
Now, just one thing is, I will conduct these performances of Mozart, not for all of you who know it so well, but for those of you who don't, because it was going kicking and screaming to a performance of Don Giovanni that has ultimately led me to have a career that's taken me around the world. Saw Don Giovanni, quite enjoyed it, and the singers were so huge.
Now, how old were you?
I was 17. But I then went up to Cambridge and sang every night as a choral scholar, and then went down one evening to see one of the very, very early performances of the play Amadeus. And it was that really did it. And it was going back, I immediately wanted to put on that wind serenade that is in the third scene where Salieri is eating the Küche and he hears the high oboe and says, that is the voice of God. And I then did it, and one of the music dons said, why on earth are you reading economics? So secretly, without telling my father, I changed from economics to music, and the rest is history. But it is Mozart, which has been the sort of bedrock of my career, and I think it should be the bedrock of any opera company's career. It should be, the standard of the Mozart in any house is how a house should be judged. And it just astonishes me, in all the German-speaking houses, they put Magic Flute on without any orchestral rehearsal. The singers arrive on a Monday morning and they're performing on Wednesday night. And it's just part of life in Germany.
I don't know about you, but I'm dying to see Graham play Salieri in a production of Amadeus sometime. Matthew, tell us about how you got into this business.
Well, it was an accident. I entered college as a pre-med and came out pre-law. Was always working in theater, but I was never serious about it. So after college, I actually worked as a congressional aide for a couple of years. While I was doing that, I was also acting in a small theater in Washington. So in the evening, I was playing a corrupt drug dealer. So in the evening, I would get beaten to death 6 or 7 times a week, and then pick myself off the floor, go back up to the hill, and do the speech writing that I was being paid to do.
I thought that was good preparation for being in politics.
I thought so too, actually, And literally, my first job in opera was driving a truck for the Western Opera Theater, which was then the touring company out of San Francisco. The only reason I got that job is because I traveled for a while, was going to move to, so I'll tell this very quickly. I was going to move to LA and marry my high school, my college girlfriend. We were on the rocks, didn't work out. I sent some resumes out just to see, and got a call from Western Opera Theater, said, can you come up and interview? I said, great. They called me the next day and said, don't, we've hired somebody. But because things weren't going well with the girlfriend, I needed a break. I said, I'll drive up and see you guys anyway. Well, 2 weeks later, they called me and said, the guy we hired just hit a bridge abutment on the Golden Gate with his motorcycle, broke a leg. Can you come out tomorrow and drive a truck to Seattle? So that's how it started. And my girlfriend, by the way, currently lives in Dallas, and we just had lunch today. So it's all kind of
And aren't you glad you didn't marry her?
Right. But my first real job in opera was right here in Dallas. When I was driving back and forth looking for work, I interviewed with the then production manager of the company, a lady named Charlotte Schumacher, and she hired me as an assistant stage manager. That was some time ago. The president was Gerald Ford. And the first production I worked on here was a production of Cenerentola with von Stade, Rocky Blake, Claudio Desderi, Paolo Montosolo.
1979.
1979, exactly. Wow. And in those first years, people like that, and Alfredo Kraus and John Vickers were coming through here, and I said, you know what? This is it. And the company very generously also allowed me to do my own stagings of student matinees of Traviata, I think, and one other, as long as I could do my stage management as well. So that's kind of how it got started.
It's a great story. All right, questions from the audience. Marilyn.
Tell us how old your little girls are.
Well, they're not little anymore.
The question is, how old are his children?
My children are 18 and almost 15.
Well, when you first started coming here, they were babes.
Yeah, when I made my debut in '93, my ex-wife. Thanks for bringing it up, Marilyn. Well, no, I'm kidding. My ex-wife was pregnant. It was student performances of Barbara Seville, in the fall of '93, and then my oldest daughter Layla came in '94 in February. Yep. And Lauren was born in '97, which, interestingly enough, I was supposed to be in the Magic Flute production in 1997, and Jonathan was very, very nice to release me because I had another offer.
I won't even begin to tell you that whole long, sad saga, but we got you in Magic Flute eventually. That's all that counts. Other questions? Yes. Magic Flute is, the question is it often translated? It's frequently translated into the language of the country in which it's being performed. In French, it's La Flûte Enchantée, and in Italian, it's called Il Flauto Magico, which I love. I just think it sounds wonderful. Il Flauto Magico.
It's also done sometimes with the dialogue in the language of the country in which it's being performed and the musical numbers in the German.
But we have talked about this for years, but we're an international opera company, and it's incumbent upon us to maintain an international level. And if we were doing a special performance for children, as they have done recently at the Met in New York, and they did it in English, but when you have an international cast, I mean, everyone here actually is American, but for example, our Queen of the Night, Lubica Vargicova, is from the actually Slovakia. And don't ever tell her I almost said Czech Republic. At any rate, for her to have done this in English would have been a challenge. And in order to keep the international standards up, it's always, almost always done in the original language.
But it's not done that often in English here.
In certain companies, like in Santa Fe, for example, they alternate. Some years they do it in German, some years they do it in English, and it just depends on who happens to be in the show. Yes, Pat.
I'm going to be insistent on this question for years and years. Mr. Cash and everybody, Jonathan, you have never sat up there and told us from your beginning.
Oh, she wants to know my beginnings. Actually, I have told this story of more than once. You've just missed a few opera insights. But I will tell you, anyway, the short version. When I was about 6, I saw a movie called Miranda, in which a British doctor has gone fishing and his boat capsizes, and he's saved from drowning by a mermaid played by Glynis Johns. The movie was just on Turner Classic Movies a few years ago. I hadn't seen it since I was 6. To thank him thank her for saving his life, he grants her greatest wish, which is to see what life is like on land. So he sweeps her up and takes her off to London, and she poses as a paraplegic and goes everywhere in a wheelchair with her tail covered up by a blanket. And one night they go to Covent Garden and go to hear La Traviata. It's the first time I heard opera, and I was captivated. And I came home and announced to my unwitting parents that when I grew up, I was going to be an opera singer. Now, unbeknownst to me, I was 6 years old. My father and mother both grew up in New York, and my father used to take his allowance on every Saturday and go to the Old Met and buy a standing room ticket. So he loved opera, but my mother detested the opera. So she encouraged me. She figured if you were going to study singing, that I'd have to start with the piano and learn how to read music and accompany myself. So I started taking piano lessons and hated it, but nonetheless, I decided, well, okay, fine. But I have an incredible gift. Everyone on this panel has a gift. My gift is that I could tell early on that I wouldn't pay money to hear me sing. So I found something else that I could do that would fulfill my urge. And one day I woke up and I said, I want to run an opera company. And somehow I had this epiphany that I would do this by becoming an artist manager. And I went to New York and became an artist manager, representing singers and conductors and stage directors and designers. In fact, among my clients were Bliss Ebert and Ellen Klein, who were on the panel earlier for La Traviata. And that was probably the reason I left artist management, was Bliss Ebert and Ellen Klein. But that's a whole other story. Anyway, after years of working in artist management, I had an opportunity to work on a public television special project called the Gala of Stars, and they hired me as a music coordinator and music advisor and talent coordinator. And we didn't know that you couldn't put a program together that complicated in 6 weeks, so we did. And it was a great success. It raised more money than any program in the history of public television. Beverly Sills was the host, James Levine was the conductor. And I went back to my artist management position, and a few months later, the guy who was producing that show asked me to come to work for WNET in New York, and I was a music producer for about 5 years, and out of the blue I got a call from Nicola Ruscino, who was the founder of the Dallas Opera, and he asked me if I would be interested in coming to work here, and I said, well, not really, but I'd be happy to talk to you. Now, what you may not know is that in the mid-'70s, when I had graduated college, I went to work for my father as a way of getting out of a situation not unlike yours. I was involved with this girl in Los Angeles where I went to school, and it wasn't working out, but I didn't want to break up and be the villain, and so I went to work with my father. I found out quickly how close Dallas was to Wichita, and I became a subscriber to the Dallas Opera. And I would come down to see all of these incredible performances, the productions of Alfredo Kraus and Puritani and John Vickers and Tristan, and it was an amazing experience. And then, ironically, the very first time I traveled as an artist manager to see my clients in performance was a production of Turandot here at the Dallas Opera. So there was a connection. I knew what the company was, and Nicola persuaded me to come here, and I thought I'd stay here for 2 or 3 years, and here it is 28 years later. So that's the story. Now, do we have any real questions? Oh, come on, someone.
Well,
oh,
hold
there.
on.
Yes,
wait,
Susan.
I have to say
What?
that, and you all know this, and this is my 14th production with the Dallas Opera, so I don't feel like I need to sugarcoat, but he really is the best in the business, and you are all very lucky to have him here. That's it. That's all I'm saying. I'll say no. It's true.
I guess I have to take you to dinner now.
Yeah.
All right. Susan. Yeah? Carol. Yes.
How are you going to handle the sound at Cowboy Stadium? Because I'm planning on going.
Good question. All of you are aware that we're doing this simulcast of the Saturday night performance of Magic Flute to Cowboy Stadium. The sound system is a challenge. They've done it before for various events, but we have hired a very experienced and expensive sound company to help the sound so that it will be as good as it can be in an arena. It is not going to be anything like a live performance. We hope it will be not unlike an HD transmission in a movie theater. The problem is that the audience is on 2 sides of the screen, so that there is a huge problem with the sound coming from what they're looking at. But we think we've solved it, so we're optimistic that the sound will be good. But whatever it is, the experience will be extraordinary.
Did you propose the idea? How did that originate?
The simulcast. Keith Cerny, who is our general director, worked for a number of years at the San Francisco Opera, and they have done simulcasts to Candlestick Park in San Francisco. Washington Opera has broadcast to whatever the stadium is in DC, and it's not unprecedented, but it was just something that has been successful in other communities to help bring opera to a public that wouldn't otherwise attend. The fact is that we have no idea who most of these people are. Many of them may be coming to see this because it's at Cowboy Stadium and they don't have to pay for parking, and they don't have to pay for the tour, but they get to see the inside of the building. But the fact that they're coming for this is really amazing, and the response. We've done no advertising. We have just announced it. It's been picked up by media around the world. It's really been, it's captured people's imagination. And as a result, I think it's going to be a huge success. Yes?
I have 10 tickets. I really want to see the experience. But David and I are going, we're taking 8 friends who all talk about going to opera or like opera or whatever, and we want them to see it. And so that's why we are doing this. And I think a lot of people are doing the same thing. They're getting tickets and taking friends.
Well, I think that's the whole experience of it, is that they can do this in a non-threatening environment with friends. There's no expense involved. It's very casual. People will be tailgating, and and this is the perfect piece for this kind of an event, because it is something where people can bring their family. If the kids are squirming and squealing, it's not going to be the same thing as having them inside the Winspear Opera House auditorium. So are we. Mario? We do plan to do other simulcasts. We did the opening night of Lucia this year. We did Don Giovanni last year. So, yes, we intend to continue with that. All right? All right. Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you at Magic Flute.